Well, I just want to talk about the criteria that needs to be met if you choose to strike preemptively, right? From a moral perspective, for sure, and also from a legal point of view. Even though preemption is within the unlawful legal system as something you can do, it must be done if there was no other alternative. So preclusion must be present. So if you were capable of leaving, you should have left. Although you're not obligated to leave people that can't run or property. In most cases, if you could have avoided the conflict, you should seek to do so in whatever way possible, whether that's avoidance, escape, de-escalation. If not, and violence is imminent, then you need to mitigate the violence. Right, mitigate the violation. So if you implement a clinical preemptive strike based on the right criteria that you deemed in that moment would be necessary, and implement now reasonable force because the person wouldn't allow you to leave and you had the honest belief that your life was in danger, well, as long as that level of force that you implement would parallel the threat, then preemptive force is necessary. Would be necessary and reasonable. And I put it to you that really the only reliable strategy within self-protection is preemption. And that's only available if you're switched on. So awareness of your environment and everyone and everything within that environment leads to pre-threat cue recognition. Now, if you see that early enough, that leads to escape, to avoidance, which is the best self-protection of all. But if not, and you are approached, then you should implement some form of situational control or pre-conflict positioning that puts you in a position where you can use the environment to your advantage. You can see potentially if the subject is with somebody else, and you can make note of his behaviour and where the hands are. Now, based on whether or not you should preemptively strike must be met via a criteria. So if the person is coming forward aggressively and you are forced to push them back off this lead hand, which we now know is the fence since Jeff Thompson's day, then they have in effect touched your fence. And by touching the fence, they're telling you that they want to come forward because they want to become assaultive. The objective now would be to push them back and push off them to double the distance, potentially triggering their flight response, and reinforce with a verbal and physical boundary that tells them that you don't want any problems, stay away from me, don't touch me. Now, third-party witness observation, any CCTV doesn't usually have audio, but picked up that non-verbal body language of you doing just that would be a tick for you within a post-police officer interview context or a court of law context. Because every time you push somebody away and use this fence and use verbal de-escalation, you are striving to elongate de-escalation in order to avoid possible conflict. That shows that you are not the agitator. However, there's a point of diminishing returns. So if the subject comes forward again and you're forced to shove him again, eventually that fence dynamic, which allows you to momentarily control proxemics, acts as a sensory antenna so you can read his intention, in this case coming forward, forced to push him back. That can also include him slapping your hands down because he wants to remove the barrier. Well, now it's a sensory antenna that tells me he wants this removed so he can come forward. Of course, the final precursor to violence is closing off distance with suddenness and violence. Supply speed and violence of action, in fact. So I don't want to allow that, right? So you have to have a cut-off point. So Jeff Thompson used to have the two-touch rule. And the two-touch rule is basically, I'm never going to allow anyone to touch my fence more than twice without taking action. So maybe he comes forward, stay where you are, mate, just stay there. Maybe he comes forward again, opposite, stay back, stay where he comes in again, I'm not going to hit. Right, two-touch rule this would be. Right. Personally, I've used this from experience quite extensively when I was on the doors. And by the end of my door career, my patience with people kind of thinned, and based on my understanding of pre-threat cue criteria, I would not elongate the situation. So I would take action after the first touch. So I would tell you, stay back, don't touch me or you're down. If you violate that, I'm going to act. So I had a one-touch rule. Probably because I wasn't that patient with dickheads. And I'm not that much of a fan of people. I love my own people, but I've got no time for cunts. So one-touch rule worked for me. Two-touch rule works for most people. That's the main place you want to be. Stay back, please. Just stay there. I'm not interested. I said stay where the fuck you are. Don't touch me. If you were seen doing that twice and then forced into preemptive action, well, you've got a good argument. The maximum that I would elongate that idea to would be a three-touch rule. I think if you go beyond three-touch rule, the point of diminishing returns will be upon you. That would just slap your hands down and come wailing in. And, because the fence is a temporary control of proxemics, a sensory antenna. And the third reason for the fence is it's a range fight. So if I can touch from here, I can strike from here. They're the three functions of the fence. But the person can't keep touching the lead hand. It will inevitably blow up. Right? So three-touch rule would, I would say, be stretching it. But that would be the maximum. But think about this if it bothers you, in the majority of what there is to consider within a potentially violent situation, namely your self-preservation as a primary. But if it bothers you in the main about what you're seen doing or heard saying, or your action caught and on a phone or CCTV or by witness, well then if you use a three-touch rule and you push somebody to stay where you are, and you slap your hands down, stay back, I said, stay the fuck back, and now I'm being forced to hit. Well, that's 3 times you try to push it away to elongate the escalation in order to prevent the physical. That's a tick, tick, tick for you. So, but understand the threshold of that. Every time that you are seen doing this, heard saying, stay back, I'm not interested, which is where you should be operating from. You should be operating from a non-violent platform that is assertive and non-combative in attitude at this point. Right? And if you're seen doing that and heard saying that and partial witnesses are there, they can be your best friend or your worst enemy. So you want to be saying the right things. So this one-touch rule, two-touch rule, or three-touch rule would depend on your threshold in terms of how long it takes you to actually get into gear and take action, although you should have that on a switch, because quite often you won't get 3 chances to push somebody away. But it also suggests that you've tried, in the context of the situation, may dictate you doing your utmost, because you don't want to take physical action. And the physical action that you take after 3 touches, 2 touches or 1 touch, might not even necessarily be a preemptive strike. You might pull them into a restraint. You might push them away and run. You might push them away and posture. Any number of things. Preemptive simply means taking action before they do. But for whether you use a 1-touch rule, 2-touch rule, or a 3-touch rule, depends on your personal threshold of how much shit you're going to put up with, or when you actually recognise that the situation is going to be necessary for you to preempt. So if you push me and you step back, and I've got a bladed position now, I've got 1 foot staggered back, I'm already loaded to hit you, so I'm already in a proactive position to punch you. This is a pre-threat cue. So if I push you back, you should roll on your heels and even up on your feet so you're still in a straight line. But if I push you back and now you start stuck, well, the very next move you make is going to be to attack me. So I'm either going to have to strike or cover to crash in. But nonetheless, I want to be ready now and attentive to take action. And the thing to consider is there's this threshold of adrenal stress rising within me that I need to control and keep a handle on. The adrenaline will be present immediately, but if you are confident, good situational control, and you are confident in your ability to preemptively strike, then you should manage that level of adrenal stress. But nonetheless, as the subject escalates, touches your fence, so too will your adrenal curve increase. So, I've seen this talked about recently in a really good book by Will James, which is Lawful Survival, where he talks about the threat threshold and the fear threshold. You need to be able to deal with the threat before you go past your fear threshold. This is a really good analogy, and all that means is till your adrenal curve will meet a threshold to the point where you could potentially get that stressed that you are inoperable, you can't act. So you mustn't take yourself to the point of your adrenal threshold before you take preemptive action, because otherwise you might not be able to. So you need to recognize the feelings within you. As you recognize the behavior from the exhibited individual, that indicates the attack is imminent. So understand, I'm talking from the context subjects in front of me. He's been aggressive, I'm trying to de-escalate. He's already touched the fence once, right? So maybe now he's posturing and he's talking shit, but it's here the criteria belongs. If he stood back and he's talking shit and I can go this way, we'll go this way. You've got no business being there. Because if you could have gone, you should have, right? There's circumstances where you're not obliged to leave, but if you could have avoided it, then you should have, right? So if it's not that and the person stepped in front of you and arrested your movement, touching your fence now for a second time, well, I'll be ready to level you the very next twitch you make. But you have to ask yourself, where's your threshold? At what point will you preempt? And this is what most people struggle with. And the clear indications would be if somebody suddenly shifts weight, preparing themselves in some way to do something to you. If a hand obscures, moves into something concealment, or moves into a pocket, or something like this, you want to safely assume that they're about to access a weapon. Or if you're in an environment, let's say a bar, with a table and bottles, you see the subject look at that bottle and move towards it. Well, you don't need to wait for confirmation he's going to pick up the bottle and put it around your fucking head. That's pre-threat criteria, it's preempt right there. So recognising the time to preemptively strike comes from pre-threat cue recognition of shifted weight, hands disappearing, target glancing, looking at something to pick up, or coming forward, whereby you're forced to push the person back. This is all criteria for you to preempt. The other thing that you need to assume, three things that I've said to you that you need to assume. You need to assume that there's a weapon, presence of a weapon, possibly plural. There's more than one subject who's also potentially armed, and you need to consider the fact that they've all got experience. They've either all done this before, many times, they have their mind prepared to give you violence for hours and hours before your recollection of it, seeing them and having to deal with it in the last 30 seconds. And that's if you see it coming. Everything is geared around you have the observation and the awareness to see it coming, and now you implement this structure. Now you've got a chance of preemption. If you were fucking miles away texting on your phone, you've already been ambushed. So understand, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about pre-fight context where an individual's come up to you and is about to give you a problem. So what you need to assume is he's got a weapon and he's got friends who are also possibly armed, and they've all got experience. And to top the experience, they may also have training, because everyone and their sister's training, including the wrong people. Right? So this is what you are assuming. So if that is the case, and you falter to take preemptive action in time, understand if you wait for the confirmation of the assault will come in the form of severe injury or death. And it will be too late, because once one goes, they all go. Or once the individual attacks, they will continue the attack until it's done. It will be an asymmetrical model for violence. And they will use deception in order to occupy your cognition, or they will be extremely aggressive in order to occupy your cognition. So whilst you're trying to make sense of what's going on and control the adrenal stress that's rising within you, their asymmetrical assault has already begun, and it's upon you. So that's why preemption is your best chance. So to top and tail this then, if you are at that pre-dialogue stage, you might use this sensory antenna as the touch rule as to whether or not or when you engage preemptively. That might be a 1 touch, 2 touch, or 3 touch. And understand, by touch I mean he's come forward, he's forced me to push him back, or he slapped my hand down and forced me to put this barrier back up immediately. This would constitute a touch. And the saying is, don't ever let anyone touch the fence more than twice without taking action. But there's variables. It might be a one touch, it might be two touch, it might be three touch. You might just have to hit him straight away as he's coming in with a stop hit, because his behaviour clearly indicates that this forward pressure is an attack. So lots of variables concerned, but you need to have a criteria as to why. You need to be able to articulate your defence to a police officer or a court of law after as to why you did what you did. You know, so why did you strike this individual in the head? Well, I had the honest belief in that moment he was about to hurt me. I saw this shift in weight, I saw his hand go behind his back, I had the honest belief he was reaching for a knife, and I couldn't even tell you what happened. I was so scared, I just reacted. And this is the way you need to approach this kind of argument, and that's legitimate, because you will feel scared. You'll have a very little intel information as to what's going on, but if you see anybody shifting their weight or putting their hands in an obscured position, you need to assume the worst and you need to act immediately. So this would be your criteria to preempt based on that. Now, the key element that you can implement here is a bypassing of indecision. So understand that once this individual starts to become extremely aggressive, particularly if your heart rate starts to escalate, if you have no experience of this, your blood will leave the frontal neocortex of your brain and you will become more limbic brain, where you are focused only on how you feel. And the more that you try to remain cognitive or maintain an engagement in language, the faster you are going to become inoperable. You need to recognize at that moment exactly that you're losing cognition and there's a need to act because you are at adrenal threshold. Understand also within the context of preemption, if you're dealing with more than one person, then you would seek to de-escalate. It would be the best thing you could do, if possible, if it's safe to do so. And whilst doing that, you will position yourself pre-conflict, however few seconds that may be, where you can stack them both in a line. But if the person that's behind the initial subject that you've put your fence to starts to move rapidly, well, he's exceeded the speed of which it takes for you to keep them in a line. You can no longer keep them in a flanked, stacked position so you can maintain safety. So now you would be your criteria to preempt. So if there's two people walking towards me, I'll contact manage you both. As soon as one of them moves, boom, I'm dropping the first one to get the numbers down, because I know that I can't keep stacking position and I don't have enough time to stack position again with now two individuals within arm's length of me where they can hurt me to be able to fend off their assault or stop their assault. So that would be the criteria for me to preempt at that moment. So I need to understand why you did what you did, and you need to think about how you would articulate that back to a third party. You need intelligent power when you articulate why you did what you did in a preemptive sense or any self-preservation sense, right? So a very good way in which to implement these kind of practices is to get them so they are unconsciously competent and work them into motor memory, downloading into the subconscious via motor memory by using visualization to visualize a situation that will induce the minor feelings of adrenaline that you would feel that would be present. There is an elicitation of an adrenal response if you use visualization in training. It will increase your heart rate and you'll get a splash of adrenaline. Now you're downloading direct data to the subconscious brain of how you can respond. And it can be a auto response. So example, you can do it with touch, tactile, and you can do it with auditory or language with cue words, right? So the action of practicing on your bob, let's say your two-touch rule. You might visualize an aggressive individual in front of you, you're trying to de-escalate, then you visualize him coming forward and you push off and tell him to stay back, right? You're trying to calm him down, everything else comes forward here, you force him to push, and then he comes in and you strike, right? So you touch once, you touch twice, bang. Touch once, touch twice, bang. And you kind of condition that through repetition so that you can bypass any indecision in the moment where it's difficult to remain cognitive. The other thing that you can do is implement the use of a question. So the grandfather during the 90s, the modern grandfather of reality-based self-defense, Jeff Thompson, talked about preemption before anyone else. He talked about the controlling and understanding of fear, where most people never had a concept of it. And he talked about the importance of preemption and the action trigger created by asking a question so that you would bypass and hit automatically. So he would work on a bag or a bob or pads, ideally with a partner, and ask a question, strike. Ask a question, strike. So what you're trying to say? Bang! So what you're trying to say? Bang! Like so. And he would rep this out to the point where when he dropped in the word say, it would just come out automatically, automated. So you can, these strategies are very, very useful for somebody who has never had any real experience of violence before, practices some form of self-preservation skill, let's say. In which case, if you practice any form of self-defense, self-protection or combative training, it has to include the elicitation of an adrenal response. You have to implement simulation into your training that will trigger adrenaline, that will give you exposure and inoculation to aggression, to contact, to getting manhandled, to getting hit. You need to implement those strategies in a physical sense with coaching in the kit. And you also need to regularly visualize those kind of situations when you're training, whether you're training with a partner on the pads or you're training solo. You need to implement the best training resource that you have, which is the virtual reality simulator between your ears. So I would imagine you stood in front of this thing, this bob, this bag, this pad. I'm not hitting an inanimate object. I'm hitting somebody where if I don't get this fucking right, he's going to hurt me. And I'm not going to allow him to hurt me. I'm not going to allow this fucking entity to take me away from all I love, or all I love away from me. So fuck you. And fuck you for putting me in this situation where I've got to preemptively strike you. Now you're going to get it. So I would be in that kind of mentality and mainframe, and I'd work off my trigger, touch, bang. And I'd work off the word association, ask the question, bang. And I would always finish the last of my reps with blitzkrieg, with a continuous attack. So my preemptive option, boom, I'll be the first of a continuous assault that won't stop until the subject is down and no longer ambulatory. Very, very useful strategy to implement in simulation training and via visualization. Even if you just learn one or two basic strikes and you have a piece of impactive kit and a pad on your own, you can train these kind of things solo, and it will give you a good self-protection strategy.